He found her like a ghost lying at the entrance of his empire, a small figure against the black marble floor of his penthouse door. She wore wet clothes, and her pale skin stood out in the dark hallway. She was curled up tightly in a ball, shaking so hard that even the gold K on the doorframe seemed to tremble with her. She was not begging. She was not screaming. She was just there, as if waiting to disappear. Kang Jae-hyun's hand moved instinctively to the hidden pistol at his waist. Then she looked up, and in that moment, for the first time in 10 years, the most feared man in Seoul felt his heart stop. Because this was not just a coincidence. It was the beginning of something dangerous. But before we find out who she is and why she came to him, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Let's get into it. The freezing rain had been hitting the glass towers of Gangnam for 6 hours straight. It was the kind of sharp November rain that turned the Seoul skyline into a blurry mix of neon blue and dark gray, like a broken painting. Inside the elevator of Baekho Towers, Kang Jae-hyun watched the numbers rise toward the 50th floor. His face showed no emotion. In the chrome reflection, he looked as cold and sharp as the knife hidden in his boot. His mind was still stuck on the night's work. 3 hours of hard negotiations in a dark basement with no windows. The metallic taste of blood still felt fresh on his knuckles. He carried the weight of a syndicate that survived through his lack of mercy. He was 32 years old, and for the past 10 years, he had turned his life into a wall of cold control. To Jae-hyun, people were either tools to use or problems to remove. He lived in a world where weakness meant death, and mercy was only a lie. He expected to step into an empty hallway and pour himself a strong drink. But he did not expect the one thing his security team could never block, a soul that looked even more broken than his own. The penthouse was usually a quiet place, like a church with no sound. But today, that silence felt heavy. It carried the presence of the girl sleeping in the guest wing. Kang Jae-hyun stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the gray morning light struggle to break through the thick Seoul smog. He had not slept at all. His knuckles had been washed clean from last night's violence, but he still felt faint stings that were not really there. He watched Dr. Park walk out of the guest suite. Physically, she is stable, the doctor said in a low voice. But what her body shows is disturbing. Jae-hyun. Jae-hyun turned slightly, his eyes sharp. Tell me. There are marks on her wrists and ankles. Old, but deep. They suggest she was tied up for a long time. Maybe years. The doctor paused, then lowered his voice. But the worst part is her throat. He hesitated while looking at his notes. There is no damage to her vocal cords. No injury. No illness. But when I tried to examine her, she didn't just refuse to speak. She looked afraid of sound itself. She is not mute, Jae-hyun. She has been silenced. Jae-hyun gave a small sharp nod, dismissing the doctor, and walked into the suite. Seo-yeon was no longer in the bed. She was sitting in the corner of the room on the soft rug. She had found a charcoal pencil and a stack of expensive paper from the desk. She did not look up when he entered. Her hand moved quickly and shakily, scratching the paper again and again. That was the only sound in the room. He knelt a few feet away, keeping distance from her space, a rule he rarely respected with anyone. Seo-yeon, he said softly. She flinched when she heard her name. Her hand stopped for a moment, then continued. When she finished, she did not hand him the paper. She simply pushed it across the floor. Jae-hyun picked it up. It was not a drawing of a person or a place. It was a detailed sketch of a bird trapped inside a cage made of human ribs. Above, it were strange symbols, shapes that looked like a language, not just art. Is this where you came from? He asked, pointing at the cage. She looked up at him. Her face was pale, tears drying on her cheeks, her hair messy around her face. She slowly shook her head. Then she took the paper back and drew one rough, broken line across the bird's throat. After that, she pointed straight at Jae-hyun's chest, at the silver pin on his suit, the emblem of the Baekho Syndicate. A cold feeling spread through Jae-hyun's body. She was not just a victim. She was a witness. And through her drawings, she was telling him something terrifying. Her cage had been built by the ghosts inside his own organization. The digital clock on the nightstand blinked 3:14 a.m. Its red light spread through the dark guest suite like a weak warning. Kang Jae-hyun sat in the dark study next to it. The security monitors glowed softly in his eyes. Most of the penthouse was silent and dark, but he stayed focused on the soft, steady breathing of the girl in the next room. The attack did not come with noise or force. There was no crash, no gunshot. It came with a quiet click of a door handle and the soft sound of shoes on the floor. Jae-hyun did not move. On the monitor, he saw a woman in a dark housekeeping uniform slip into Seo-yun's room. She moved too smoothly to be a maid. She wore gloves. In her hand was a small canister, a silent gas, meant to knock someone out without sound. She leaned over the bed, her shadow covering Seo-yun's small body. Just as she reached for Seo-yun's throat, Jae-hyun was already there. He did not use a gun. The sound would have scared the girl. Instead, he came out of the shadows like he was part of the room itself. His hand grabbed the attacker's wrist, and the bone snapped. The woman did not scream. Real professionals never did. She turned fast and pulled a small ceramic blade from her sleeve. She aimed for his neck. Jae-hyun blocked it with his arm. The blade cut through his sleeve and made a thin line of blood. In one fast move, he hit her ribs with his knee and slammed her into the wall. His hand closed around her throat, just enough to control her. "Who sent the cleaner to my house?" Jae-hyun said. His voice was low, but full of danger. The woman gasped for air. Her eyes moved quickly toward the bed. Seo-yun was awake. She was pressed against the headboard, shaking hard. Her hands covered her mouth, trying to hold in a scream that never came. But she was not looking at the attacker. She was looking at the blood on Jae-hyun's arm. The woman tried to attack again, but Jae-hyun was faster. He twisted her arm hard behind her back until it broke with a sharp pop, then slammed her head into the doorframe. She went unconscious before she hit the floor. Jae-hyun stood over her still body. His chest moved heavily. His calm control was starting to break. He looked at Seo-yun. She was shaking like a leaf in a storm. Her eyes stayed on the blood on the floor. He did not call his men yet. He stepped closer to the bed and slowly raised his bloodied hand. "She won't hurt you," he said, his voice rough. "No one in this house will ever hurt you again." Seo-yun reached out slightly, her hand shaking. She pointed not at the door, but at his wounded arm. She could not speak, but her eyes were full of fear and understanding. She was not just afraid for herself. She was afraid that her presence would get him killed. And Jae-hyun realized something dark and clear. The danger was not only outside the door, it was also inside the silence she carried. The smell of antiseptic and iron stayed in the study even after the cleanup team finished in the guest room. Jae-hyun sat at his desk. Seo-yun's charcoal drawings were spread out in front of him like scattered pieces of a puzzle. He ignored the security reports. He ignored the interrogation updates. His full attention was on her drawings. At first, they looked like broken images from a broken mind, cages, bones, sharp lines. But under the bright desk light, the patterns began to make sense. He turned one drawing slowly. What looked like a rib cage was not a rib cage at all. At a certain angle, it matched a blueprint perfectly. It was the old fortress, a hidden bunker under the DMZ. The Baekho Syndicate had once used it as a main vault many years ago. Jae-hyun's breath stopped for a moment. That place was supposed to be gone, lost after the Great Purge, the night his father was killed. All records had been destroyed. all data erased. But here it was, drawn by a girl who should never have known it. He picked up another drawing, a pattern of circles, drawn again and again with careful detail. He placed it over a map of Seoul's underground train system. The circles did not match the tracks. They matched hidden ventilation routes used for old smuggling paths. "How do you know these dead places?" he whispered. He stood up and walked to the guest room. Seo-yeon sat in bed with her knees pulled close to her chest. She stared at the door like she expected something terrible to enter at any moment. When she saw him, her eyes dropped to the papers in his hand. Jae-hyun placed the drawings on the bed. "These aren't just drawings, are they?" he asked. She looked at the fortress sketch. Her eyes filled with tears, but she did not look away. She slowly reached out and pointed to a small hidden mark in the corner of the drawing. A tiger lily. Jae-hyun froze. It was his father's private seal, a mark never used in public. He looked at her again, really looked at her. Her face, her jaw, her eyes, they were familiar in a way that hurt. She was not just a broken girl. She was not just a key. She was a ghost from a past he thought was buried forever. "My father didn't just hide the money," Jae-hyun said quietly. "He hid you." Seo-yeon let out a broken breath. She grabbed his pen and wrote 3 words on the back of the map. "They are coming." The 3 words, "They are coming," hung in the penthouse air like a death sentence. By midnight, the rain had turned into thick fog. It swallowed the Seoul skyline and mirrored the confusion in Jae-hyun's mind. He had gone to his office to speak with his most trusted men, but he could not focus. His thoughts kept drifting to the guest room, where a girl from his father's past now held the key to his future. He did not hear the terrace door open. The wind was too loud. The fog was too heavy. Only a quiet motion alert on his tablet made him stand up suddenly. He ran to the balcony, and there she was. Seo-yeon had stepped onto the narrow stone ledge 50 floors above the ground. She wore a thin silk robe he had given her. The wind whipped her hair wildly around her face. She was not trying to jump. She was looking toward the service stairs, her bare feet red and hurt from the freezing metal. "Seo-yeon, stop!" Jae-hyun's voice broke through the wind. For the first time, it did not sound cold or controlled. She turned around, standing at the edge with the empty drop behind her. Fear filled her eyes, but not for herself. She pointed quickly toward the elevator area, then at him. She shook her head hard. Her hands moved fast. She mimed something around her neck, like a collar tightening, like someone being slowly choked. She was trying to tell him something, that her presence was dangerous, that she was a signal, a target, a reason for the Shadow Council to come after him. She wanted to disappear into the fog to protect him. Before she could move again, Jae-hyun rushed forward. He grabbed her waist and pulled her off the ledge. He pressed her back against the strong glass wall of the penthouse. She struggled, hitting his chest with weak fists. Her mouth opened in a silent scream of frustration. "Look at me," he ordered. He cupped her face and forced her to meet his eyes. His thumbs wiped away rain and tears mixed together. "You think you are a curse," he said. "You think leaving will save me?" She nodded quickly, crying silently. "I built a fortress over 10 years because I had nothing left to lose," he said, his forehead touching hers. "But you are the only real thing left of my father." His voice lowered. "You are not a burden, Seo-yeon. You are the reason I finally have something worth fighting for." He held her tighter. "No one leaves my sight," he said. "Not the assassins. Not you. You stay in my shadow, or you stay in my arms. Do you understand?" Seo-yeon finally broke. She leaned into him, burying her face in his neck. Her fingers grabbed his coat tightly. She did not speak, but she stopped fighting. The calm after the balcony did not last long. A sharp alert sound broke the silence in Jae-hyun's system. He sat in his dim study while neon light from the city blurred through the fog outside. Seo-yun sat on the sofa behind him, watching him closely, as if he was the only solid thing left in her world. Jae-hyun raised his hand and projected a video onto the wall. It showed a dark, heavy boardroom table. 5 pairs of hands rested on it. Old, powerful hands covered with rings and age marks. These were the elders of the Shadow Council, the ones who survived the purge that killed his father. Jae-hyun, a rough, distorted voice said, "You have been hosting a ghost. We warned you about emotion. It weakens your position." The camera shifted. A clear image appeared of Seo-yun on the penthouse doorstep. It was taken by a drone they had been secretly using. "The girl is the living key," the voice continued. "Her voice can unlock the dead man systems in our East Asian assets. Without her, the vault is dead. With her, the Baekho Syndicate returns to power, under our control." Jae-hyun's jaw tightened. Seo-yun's breathing became shaky behind him. "You have 24 hours to bring her to the Incheon docks," the voice said. "Give us the key, and your disobedience will be forgiven. Refuse, and we will still take her, even if we only take her voice." The screen went black. Silence filled the room. The threat was clear. They did not need her alive. They only needed her voice. Jae-hyun's anger rose cold and sharp. He turned slightly and saw Seo-yun standing behind him. She was not hiding. She reached out and touched the empty screen where the image had been. Then she looked at him. Her eyes were calm, but full of pain and understanding. She now knew the truth. As long as she stayed silent, she was valuable. But the moment she spoke, she would become a weapon, one that could save him, or destroy them both. Jae-hyun stood up and closed the space between them. "They think you are a tool," he said quietly. "They think I am just another man they can control. They are wrong." Seo-yun touched the scar on his arm. He covered her hand with his. His grip was firm. "We are not going to Incheon," he said. "We are going to war." The war was waiting at the edge of the horizon, but for a few stolen hours, Jae-hyun chose to let the world outside the penthouse disappear. The storm had finally ended. It left behind a bruised purple sky and a silence that felt safe instead of dangerous. He found Seo-yun in the grand drawing room. Her small figure stood in front of the city lights. She was near the Steinway grand piano, her fingers hovering just above the white keys, as if they could hurt her. She did not turn when he came in, but her tense shoulders relaxed slightly when she caught the familiar scent of his sandalwood cologne. "My mother used to say music is the only language that doesn't need a voice," Jae-hyun said softly. He sat on the piano bench and motioned for her to sit beside him. She hesitated. Her eyes studied him, searching for any sign of danger. Then she slowly sat down at the edge of the seat. Jae-hyun gently took her hand and guided it to the piano keys. He did not just show her where to play. He placed his hand over hers, steady and warm. He pressed a single C major chord. The sound filled the room and vibrated through their bodies. He started a simple melody, like a lullaby from his childhood, something he had long tried to forget. With his help, Seo-yun began to follow the rhythm. At first, her fingers were stiff and unsure. The notes were barely sounds. But slowly time passed. Fear left her movements. Her playing became smoother, softer, more natural. Then she made a wrong note. The sound broke the calm. Seo-yun flinched and pulled her hand away. Jae-hyun did not get angry. He leaned closer and, with a light touch, played the correct note again, almost teasingly. Seo-yun looked at him, and for the first time, the emptiness in her eyes disappeared. A small breath slipped out of her, silent, but light, like a laugh she could not fully make. Then it happened. Her lips slowly curved into a small, fragile smile. It was weak and uncertain, but real. To Jae-hyun, it felt more powerful than anything he had ever seen. In that moment, the cold version of him, The clinical boss was gone. Looking at her smile, he understood something. His father had not only hidden a key or a secret in her, he had hidden something human, something Jae-hyun had buried for 10 years. He was no longer just protecting a witness. He was protecting the only thing that made his world feel worth living. He did not move away. He stayed beside her as the music continued, tied to the one person who had learned how to speak without sound. That fragile peace did not last long. Less than an hour later, everything broke. They had moved to another safe house, a strong, plain concrete villa outside Incheon. They believed the penthouse was already compromised. Jae-hyun chose the security team himself. He only trusted men who had suffered and bled with him. At his side was Minho, his second-in-command, a man who had stood with him since the Great Purge. But something was wrong. As Jae-hyun checked the security feed, he noticed a problem. The outside sensors were not just failing, they were being controlled from inside. He slowly turned to Minho. But Minho's eyes were no longer loyal. They looked empty, like someone who had already made his decision. "How much, Minho?" Jae-hyun asked quietly. "How much did they pay you?" Minho did not answer. He simply stepped back and tapped a command into his device. Then he whispered, "The key is in the north parlor." A second later, the explosion came. But it was not from the front door. It came from below. The villa shook violently. Seo-yeon was thrown from her seat as dust filled the air. Before the dust cleared, the windows exploded inward. The night filled with flashbangs, shouting, and the sound of ropes snapping as attackers descended. "Go! Basement!" Jae-hyun shouted, grabbing Seo-yeon and shielding her as glass rained down. He pushed her behind a heavy wooden desk just as armed men stormed inside. Jae-hyun moved fast, calm, deadly. He fired twice, dropping the first attacker instantly. But there were too many. Minho had given them everything. The maps, the blind spots, the codes. The safe house had become a trap. Jae-hyun looked back at Seo-yeon. She was pressed against the desk, hands over her ears, watching Minho with shock and fear. Then she saw Jae-hyun get shot in the shoulder. His body twisted from the impact. Blood splashed onto the white papers of her sketches. Something inside Seo-yeon broke. The silence that had protected her for so long no longer felt safe. It felt like a prison. As Minho raised his weapon to finish Jae-hyun, Seo-yeon stood up. She did not run. She did not scream. She only looked at the man who betrayed them, and she opened her mouth, not to speak, but to finally become something more than silence. The air inside the underground bunker was old and cold. It carried the taste of metal and electricity. They had reached the deepest part of the Baekho Empire, a reinforced safe place far below the Seoul subway lines. Above them, the city sounded like a faint ghost of movement. Jae-hyun leaned against a server rack. His shoulder was badly bandaged. His face was pale from exhaustion. In front of them stood the interface, a black glass console that had not been used since the night his father died. Above them, the council's forces kept attacking the heavy blast doors. The deep, repeated hits echoed through the tunnels like a giant heartbeat. "They think this is about money, Seo-yeon," Jae-hyun said weakly, staring at the console. "They think my father left behind a treasure map. But the maps you drew, they don't lead to gold. They lead to the base of everything they built." Seo-yeon stood in front of the biometric scanner. The blue light from the machine lit up her face like she was something unreal. She looked at Jae-hyun, then at the microphone. She took his hand gently and traced the scars on his fingers one last time. Then she turned back to the machine. For the first time in 10 years, she took a full breath, without fear. When she spoke, her voice was soft, low, and calm. It blended strangely with the hum of the machines. "Protocol. Fallen petal," she whispered. The system did not just unlock. It exploded into action. Red lines of code ran across every screen and wall. It spread like fire through data, wiping out bank accounts, secret files, and hidden locations tied to the Shadow Council. The living key was not made to open their empire. It was made to destroy it. As the system ran, Seo-yun quickly typed a message for Jae-hyun. My father knew greed would destroy everything. He didn't hide the wealth to save it. He hid me to end it. The vault's true purpose was now clear. It was a self-destruct system for the criminal world. Every illegal deal, every hidden record, every dark secret was being sent to international authorities in real time. The voice they had hunted for was the sound of their downfall. Jae-hyun watched his empire collapse into lines of code. For the first time, he felt something lift from his chest. The weight he had carried for years was gone. He looked at Seo-yun. Her voice still echoed softly in the room. She was no longer a key. She was a person who had burned down a kingdom to save him. The money is gone, he said quietly, a faint smile on his face as the lights flickered. The power is gone. What do we do now? Seo-yun did not write this time. She leaned closer, resting her forehead against his. And she whispered the only answer that mattered. We live. Sirens began to echo in the distance across Seoul. A rising wave of sound marked the collapse of the Shadow Council. Above ground, the city was in chaos. The Fallen Petal Protocol had been released to the world, exposing the council and making them the most wanted criminals in Asia. But deep under the ground, the bunker was silent. The machines were no longer humming. For Jae-hyun and Seo-yun, it felt like the end of one life and the start of another. Jae-hyun supported Seo-yun as they walked through a narrow tunnel toward the Han River. His expensive coat was gone. His silver emblem was gone. Everything that once defined him was left behind. Now he was just a wounded man walking beside someone he chose to protect. They came out into the morning light. The sun was rising over the river, painting the water in gold. The fog had disappeared. Everything looked clean, like the world had been reset. A simple black car waited nearby. Not a military vehicle, not a syndicate car, just something ordinary. Seo-yun stopped before getting in. She turned back toward the distant silhouette of Baekho Towers. She looked different now. Stronger, steadier. She touched her throat and then looked at Jae-hyun. No paper was needed. The living key was gone. The voice she had found now belonged only to her. The assets are gone, Jae-hyun, she whispered, stronger than before. There's nothing left to hunt. Then our work is finished, he said softly. He pulled out a small, dirt-stained locket and placed it in her hand. His fingers stayed there for a moment longer than necessary. Where do we go now? He asked. Seo-yun did not look at the city behind them. She looked forward, toward the open road. She got into the car. Jae-hyun sat in the driver's seat and started the engine. Seo-yun turned on the radio. A soft piano melody filled the car, the same kind of music that once brought them peace. As the car moved forward, they left everything behind. The empire fell in the distance. Ahead of them was only morning light, open roads, and the quiet freedom of starting over. This story shows that power, money, and control can all collapse in a moment, but truth and humanity can still survive. Jae-hyun learns that building an empire without compassion only leads to emptiness, and that real strength is not in fear or violence, but in protecting and choosing to change for someone worth saving. Seo-yun shows that even someone who has been broken and silenced can still become powerful enough to bring down an entire system when the truth is finally set free. In the end, the story teaches that healing, trust, and love can destroy even the darkest worlds, and sometimes the people we see as weak carry the greatest strength of all. Bottom of form.